Okay, we're now on our third segment, and I'm told not to keep swinging my chair. I am enjoying my swivel chair, my bar stool. But this is a very significant segment for this episode because we're going to discuss and show you a documentary about the role of the Chinese and Filipino-Chinese guerrillas in the Second World War. Last week we had the Araw ng Kagitingan. People forget that there were 500 who died, Filipino-Chinese and Chinese guerrillas in the Long March, in the Bataan Death March. And almost 10,000 Filipino-Chinese and Chinese volunteers died in the Second World War fighting for the Philippines. So when I recall and I remember a certain so-called intellectual asking, where will Filipino-Chinese loyalties be in case of a war with China? There will not be a war with China, and the Filipinos, our Filipino-Chinese will always fight with our Filipino nation. And I will not let anybody else define who the enemy is. We must define it as Filipinos. Ang problema, merong mga estranghero na sinasabi, hindi, ang kalaban nyo ito. No, we must define it ourselves as a nation. Anyway, Ado Paglinawan, in his book, A Problem for Every Solution, I took note of this because he says that in the liberation of Manila, out of 8 guerrilla units that helped in the liberation of Manila, 3 were Chinese and Filipino-Chinese. So, Ado, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, right here, I'll cut the chase short. There were actually 1,000 who joined the death march. 500 died. There were 7,000 who volunteered into the USFA at the break of the war. But these 3 Chinese guerrilla groups, the first was the Wachi, another group was the Kuomintang Organized Chinese Volunteers of the Philippines, and the third was the Chinese Overseas Wartime Yushukan Militia. They were given accreditation by Douglas MacArthur to join the liberation of Manila, starting from Lingayen.
Yeah. Okay. I also must take note that the Wachi was the Communist Chinese Guerrillas in the Philippines.
Yes.
Okay, let's look at this 12-minute documentary produced by Mr. Tommy C., whose father was one of the guerrillas and a veteran, and Oliver Aragon, whose father was also one of the warriors in the Second World War, Filipino-Chinese warriors. So this is going to be 11-12 minutes, so let's sit back and learn more about the history of the Filipino-Chinese guerrillas. Okay.
Unknown to many of us, inside the Chinese cemetery, there stand several monuments and burial sites of Chinese guerrillas who were executed or killed in action for their underground resistance movements during the dark days of the Japanese occupation. These pillars were erected in memory of the forgotten and unsung Chinese heroes who perished in the defense of a country that is not even theirs, the Philippines. In the years between 1938 and 1945, the outbreak of the Second World War, when Hitler's armies invaded Europe, the Japanese Imperial Army occupied the Malaya Peninsula, which is now known as Southeast Asia. The Philippines was not spared. A day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Japanese warplanes simultaneously bombed the different strategic points in the Philippine Islands. On January 2nd, 1942, when the Japanese Imperial Army entered Manila, one of the first tasks of the Kempeitai was to round up prominent Chinese businessmen whom they knew or suspected to be anti-Japanese. Many of them were arrested, imprisoned, and some were brutally murdered. Even Chinese Consul General Kwang Sun-yang and the members of his consulate staff were taken to the Chinese cemetery, where they were executed in April of 1942.
日本拍入到马尼拉是最后，因你无顾国际的公法个，所以将咱的领事杨光生，甲因内面7位的官员啊，拢总计去解拍死。伊拍死了啊，跩咱这华侨青年啊，大家就真大反应，所以大家加入咗这地下工作、抗日的工作啊。
This tragic incident triggered outrage and bitterness among the Chinese in the Philippines. They were forced to leave their families, close their businesses, and flee to the mountains in different provinces to join the Filipino guerrilla movements.
我当时是15、6岁，因为我去日本咧拍水片，所以我才参加这个地下工作。地下工作我无活动，是定出来哩，咧参加小铁路线店，然后再报告种诶我同志，我咧上报纸诶话。
二波南吼，第5月14到22日，接互二波南吼，我听有4、5个大桶毒药，阮在向美国工程兵士啊报告，才派兵出来清除4、5桶的毒药，然后在安保的部队才摕去安迪普运海航边啊去。 有些安尼吼，
第一大队伊的作战哦，是一建军了后是带中日上战役，后来呢，受到1943年啊，日本诶大洋扫通啊出动。 海陆空军啊，5000几名，大棒棒啊，开始大洋扫通啊。因菲律宾游击队发展为零，变做老百姓，咱华侨无法通发展为零啊。发展为零落去到第马六月马上被从日本掠去，所以阮会做这种只有说。 要开发新的战场，这通过了带3个去米亚巴岛、西兰马的历史进入日本啊摆地。
Among the Chinese guerrilla units which were involved in the underground movements against the Japanese were the following.
Chinese were a group who organized themselves into different units. And during the war, they had their own sphere of activities, and they were very helpful in intelligence work, sabotage, and finally combat. If we have to take now, as I said, one by one, I would first take the first unit that we encountered was the Chinese volunteers of the Philippines. The Chinese volunteers of the Philippines were organized and served under an officer who was Colonel C.I. Shing. C.I. Shing is a very good friend of ours, and they organized themselves into intelligence, sabotage, and combat units. The other unit is what we call the Kawin. They were organized also in Manila, and the leader of the Kawin that I know was a certain Li Hai Ho. Li Hai Ho had a very strong combat unit. The other unit that I was the Wachi. The Wachi was composed of sabotage, intelligence, and at the same time civilian volunteers. They had a very strong combat unit they called the 48th Squadron. The known leader to us was Ong Han Kiat. Ong Han Kiat, I think he's still alive. There was another unit they called the Pikik. We never had any real contact with them, the Pikik, and then there was another splinter group of the USCVP. As I said,
1944頭半年啊，迄次美國開始咧反攻啊，咱萬里來試啊，有美國嘅飛機飛啊，喺咧用伊咯，喺咧營炸啊，喺咧炸，迄時陣日本仔嘅堅定起來，所以就採用真嚴厲嘅手段哦，壓在伊甲對。也在預夾對，因為有在香港一個咧作亂啊，喺當地咧日本啊，來到反動咧推進，所以話夾夾有20幾個去也係相當嚴重，夾夾嘅損失也真嚴重。
3年嘅抗戰內面啊，阮嘅犧牲了100幾位嘅同志，而且光復嘅時陣啊，阮美軍啊，戰略另外人，阮嘅同志，而配合伊美軍戰略誒，佢哋拍到面試，而且由阮嘅同志呢配合因戰車部隊去拍山東杜馬大學嘅集中營，而丟出在英國、美國在北京嘅橋邊來，搞在部隊嘅人。
if another war is coming, I would like to have the Chinese guerrillas with me, because they really are good fighters. They are loyal, and they are people who really would stick and not run away.
As president of the descendants of World War II Chinese Filipino heroes, this documentary film will preserve the legacy of our forefathers during the Second World War. They have shared, they have contributed, they even take or risk their life just to preserve this country which is not theirs, but they have learned to adapt it. Thank you.
President Joseph Estrada issued the Proclamation number 99 proclaiming April 17, 1997 and every year thereafter as Filipino-Chinese Freedom Fighters Day. So on this day we used to observe and celebrate this memorable day not only in Chinatown but in every town nationwide.
Okay, you remember when we visited China and the tomb of the Sultan of Sulu?
Yes.
We met Miss Anjing in a dinner.
Anjing, yeah.
Anjing is I don't know how many generations.
19th generation.
descendant
Out of 21.
of the Sultan of Sulu.
Yes.
And she said in our dinner, my ancestors came from the Philippines, but
Yes.
I'm now Chinese. And what did I say? My forefathers came from China, but I'm now Filipino. We are one family.
Yes.
We are one blood. We will never be enemies. But
Correct.
anyway, what's your reaction?
My reaction to this cannot be anything less than what Di Hongqi, a survivor of the Huachi execution of more than 200 of its members in San Pablo, Laguna, said, and I translate in English. This was said in Tagalog, broken Chinese Tagalog, mind you. I love my children. I love my grandchildren. I love the Filipinos. It is here where I had lived. This is where I will be buried. This is my country now. This fantastic warmth of two peoples fighting a common enemy during World War II is simply will be enough to bring you to tears. The Huachi members, Mentong, considered the Filipinos as siblings. And that's why I am vehemently against anybody who would be fomenting xenophobia in our society, because it will be a very bad misrepresentation of history. And in my book, this was precisely what motivated me to write in detail about all these things.
Well, in fact, your title, A Problem for Every Solution, the solution to the many problems of the Philippines, such as lack of transportation systems and so on, is China.
Yeah, precisely.
But the past administration, past because it's almost over, has been creating problems instead of solving the problem.
That's what I meant here, that our government has a problem for every solution. Yes, many find it a bit humorous, but very much true.
Okay, we have 1-2 minutes before we move on to the next segment. I've been following your Facebook postings, and you have been vehemently raging, in your Facebook about these tensions that is being created with the China Sea, over the China Sea issue.
Yes.
We have a few seconds, so maybe you can shorten it.
A lot of people would like to cut history. And those who have been criticizing China does not really start where the problem came from. Before 2009, there were really no problems. The Scarborough thing happened in 2012.
Yeah.
So what was it that in 2008 that happened that prompted an event in 2009? In 2008, the American economy started collapsing. And in 2009, its trade with Europe began to dry up. And so they were forced to announce in 2009 that they will have an Asian pivot. And this is the rebalancing of the U.S. military forces towards
Asia.
Asia Pacific. That started all the problems.
Okay.
And let nobody truncate the situation and say that this party is an aggressor when there is a precedent event before that. All other happenings insofar as China is concerned, as far as my reading is concerned, are all defensive. That's why, as you said at the beginning of this segment, there will be no war, because how can there be war when the only protagonist is the United States of America?
Okay, we'll have to end this discussion. You have to tune in again next week, because for the entire year, you will be witness to our Asian century and the surprising direction that history is taking.